Welcome to Beat Cancer, the official podcast of the UC Davis Comprehensive Cancer Center. Thank you for joining us today as we have in-depth discussions of the science, research, and advancements taking place at our National Cancer Institute designated Comprehensive Cancer Center. I'm Chris Joyce.
And I'm Stephanie Winn. We will also examine proactive approaches to cancer prevention, and most importantly, how we are breaking barriers to beat cancer in our community and beyond. Today, we are looking at the research field known as comparative oncology, and we're speaking to Dr. Robert Canter. Hello there, Dr. Canter.
Hello.
Dr. Canter leads the surgical oncologists at UC Davis Health. And we also have with us on this podcast Dr. Michael Kent. He's director of the Center for Companion Animal Health, and he's also a professor at our number one vet school in the country, UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Kent, as well.
Thank you, Stephanie and Chris. It's great to be here.
Comparative oncology is such a mouthful, but it's a really exciting new field. And even President Biden, with his reignited moonshot initiative, sees a lot of value in this kind of research. Dr. Canter, do you want to go ahead and start off by explaining what it is?
I think comparative oncology has been around as a concept for a long time. Certainly the idea that dogs and cats and other animals get cancer in much the same way that humans get cancer, and that there can be a lot to learn from studying cancers in other animals has been around for a long time, 50, 70 years. I think what's really seen a resurgence, sort of real opening up of the field recently is the intersection of comparative oncology with immunotherapy. And there really is a tremendous space for comparative oncology in that area, because it really helps bridge some of the science from sort of traditional wet lab, benchtop studies in laboratory mice, to studies in humans. And that's where, at least in my view and our view, there's a real place for comparative oncology, and to help sort of speed translation from bench to bedside, especially in cancer immunology and immunotherapy, which is obviously an area that has tremendous unmet need.
So we're testing immunotherapy in dogs who get similar cancers to humans. Getting these dogs, who are your patients, Dr. Kent, into clinical trials, seeing if that immunotherapy or combination of drugs is going to work on your patients, and then establishing clinical trials for humans down the road. But Dr. Kent, these are your patients. These aren't just, dogs that we can see if things will work. And these are patients who come from loving families who want to see them get cured, right?
No doubt, and so do I. I mean, when I think of comparative oncology, when I was first doing my residency, we did a lot of comparative oncology because there weren't a lot of veterinarians working in the oncologic field at that point, and we had to look at what was doing, how people were treating humans with cancer, and extrapolate it back to my patients, kind of using humans as the guinea pigs in a sense. All the chemotherapies, all the surgical approaches, all the radiation therapy techniques and were really developed for humans. And we brought them back to be able to help our family members, dogs, cats, horses, other animals. So yeah, first and foremost, these are my patients, and we're going to do right by them. Just as you have clinical trials in humans for diseases that we don't have good cures for, or maybe those patients where most patients will do well but can still fail, we need those same kind of opportunities for my patients. We need to be able to push the envelope for them and try to maintain their quality of life for as long as possible, or, if possible, cure them of their cancers. But, so I would say that, yes, my patients are patients. They're not lab animals, and no one thinks that I've worked with. The physicians I work with are just as understanding and responsible when it comes to carrying out these trials. In fact, we all work together. These are done in collaboration to make sure that our patients have the best outcomes, whether they be the dogs or cats who go into the trials initially, or, when we hand those trials off, I don't treat people ever, but, when we hand those trials off to get carried out in the human world, they have to be carried out ethically as well, obviously.
Well, having lost 3 dogs and 1 horse to cancer, I applaud you for what you're doing. And they're like members of your family. And we're making strides. I mean, we featured on the cover of Synthesis in our last issue an adorable dog named Tyson, who was only given a month or so to live. And a year later, in participating in our immunotherapy trial, this 3-legged guy suffering from osteosarcoma is still a very vibrant member of the family. I visited him recently, and he was full of pep and vigor. And so there are the good success stories out there, right?
Of course. And, having a cancer diagnosis is hard on the whole family, right? Whether that's a human or whether it's your pet. And I think that having compassion for that and understanding that is hard for some people who don't have pets. But if you've had a pet, if you've had a dog, you've had a cat, a horse, someone you're bonded to like that, you understand it and you get it. And, I'm a veterinarian and I do want to see humans cured from cancer. I mean, that's so important. But really my patients, my goal is to make sure what we learn can apply back to my patients, to the dogs I take care of, the cats I take care of, and their families too. For every animal I see, they're attached to a family, and that family is bound to them, and whether it's a single person or a family with multiple kids, there's a special place, in that family. Yeah. And so I think anything we can do to help prevent, diagnose, and then ultimately treat cancer from one species can be used to help another. And so what we learn in my patients, we can transfer to Bob and his group, Dr. Canter and his group, and hopefully make an impact both for, say, a dog with cancer or a cat with cancer, and then ultimately humans. And there's many similarities like, Dr. Canter was talking about.
Well, and you mentioned, I think it's important, you don't see these as lab experiments. These are not.
They're not.
They're exactly. And so, which I think is hugely important, because it's probably a big misconception in the outside world sometimes. And Steph had brought up the Synthesis cover magazine, but also just recently in the Cancer letter, Comparative Oncology was a big focus also in there. Dr. Canter, you had talked about the importance really of not giving dogs cancer.
Yeah, I think that's a fundamental point that most people don't get misunderstood on that, but there are some people who are confused that we're giving the animals cancer, and that's absolutely incorrect. And that's part of why there's a rich sort of knowledge to be gained, because they develop the cancers in the same way that humans do over time. The genetics, the biology, the interaction with the immune system is all very comparable and much different from how we do it in laboratory mice. And that's why there's so much to learn from them, because the cancers develop in exactly the same way, and therefore the similarities are very very evident, and therefore a better sort of environment to learn from them. So yes, we're not giving the dogs cancer in any way. And actually, some people think that dogs have a higher cancer burden than humans do. Certainly among mammals, dogs and humans have the highest cancer incidence, presumably because they're outliving their natural lifespan. But there are other factors involved. And there really aren't as good statistics in dogs as there are in humans. But their cancer burden is at least as high, if not higher. And so, again, that is an area where we can learn and apply it both to dogs and to people.
And they're living with humans, right? They're in the same environment. They're eating the same types of food. Is this all contributing to comparative oncology and the way we look at it?
Definitely. They live in the same environment. Their lifestyle is often very similar. Their exposures are very similar, and so their microbiomes are very similar. So those are all things that contribute. But what's also interesting is there are differences, and again, I think sort of learning from the similarities and dissecting out the differences can be very informative. For example, osteosarcoma, which is a disease, a cancer that was mentioned that affects both dogs and people. It affects dogs in a higher rate than people, but in humans, osteosarcoma strikes mostly adolescent and young adult patients, whereas in dogs, it strikes a higher aged dog population. So there is likely an important insight into the biology from trying to dissect that out further.
And interesting with osteosarcoma too is with the higher incidence really gives us the opportunity to be able to study a disease that can be very difficult to study in young adults. And there's less than Bob, about 1,000 kids, young adults who develop osteosarcoma a year, where in dogs it's been estimated between 10 and 50,000 dogs in the United States a year develop this. So this is substantial and so important to solve for dogs, but could really lead us to insights that was a relatively small number of kids developing this can happen. And there is a subpopulation of dogs in there who develop it around 2, which probably correlates to a young adult age. But most of them, like Dr. Canter was saying, Bob was saying, is that, it's the 10-year-old dog that's more likely to get it. So an older population. So those differences there can really be interesting. What is unfortunate for the dogs is that it follows a very similar course to humans, but a bit accelerated in some ways. And so without treatment, like you alluded to, patients will unfortunately die within months. Even if we use our best chemotherapies that we have and amputation or other surgeries that we can do to try to spare a limb, median survival is less than a year for dogs. And we haven't been able to move that needle in 20 years. So this is why things like immunotherapies are so important and so exciting. And we have to be able to stop the metastasis. We can get the local disease under control, but we can't get the spread under control. And that's kind of the stumbling point where we've hit and why it's so important to work on this.
With the treatments, as you examine them and look at the different treatments that are available for the companion animals, how closely does it once it's been maybe established that it works well with, like, say the canines and just our pet dogs, does the treatment like exactly parallel when it goes over to the human patient, or are you still having to do some different research and some different maybe tweaking of the treatment as it goes into the human?
I think in general they're very similar. There often are modifications that need to be made just to account for drug dosing or timing and so forth. But in general, the nature of the therapy is very similar. There is variation depending on the specific therapy, the specific clinical trial. But because there's so many similarities in physiology and pharmacology, they tend to be more similar than different in my view.
Yeah, one of the things that maybe is surprising to some people is that we use all the same drugs that are used in people. We're all mammals when it comes down to it, and this is why comparative oncology works too. But the same antibiotics that kill bacteria in humans kill bacteria or bacterial infections in dogs. The same kind of vaccines that we use for common diseases that humans get, it's the same technology and types of vaccines that are used to prevent those diseases in dogs and cats. And so, it's a very similar thing. We use the same radiation protocols and type protocols I use to treat cancer patients. We use the same chemotherapy drugs in humans that we we use in our dogs and cats. There are some species variations, of course, different toxicities that we have to watch for, be careful with. But for the most part, they're very similar. So yeah, we might have to tweak things here and there.
Dr. Canter, what therapies do you think hold the greatest promise for moving into the human realm?
I think that we study natural killer cells, which is a type of immunotherapy that works by using these cells to attack cancer cells in a very innate way. So they work differently than T cells. They don't require recognition of specific molecules on the cells. And so if those molecules aren't there, the T cells won't work. And so we think that natural killer cells have a lot of potential. And I think that by studying them in dogs, I think we really can overcome some of the barriers that have limited the field over the last 20 years or so, because NK cells, natural killer cells are called NK cells. NK cells have not really been the breakthrough that other immunotherapies have, but we think that our goal is to unlock their potential in dogs and find a way to really turn them into a breakthrough and apply them to humans.
This inhaled immunotherapy clinical trial that the dogs have been undergoing seems like it would be something really exciting. Tell us about that a little bit more.
Yes. So we have also been working on a application of cytokine therapy. Cytokines are these very powerful proteins which stimulate the immune system. The body produces them, but in very small quantities to allow the immune system to turn on but not become too uncontrolled. And they've been tried in human clinical trials with limited success, but there's a very narrow balance between when they show effects versus when they cause side effects or toxicity. So we came up with the idea of delivering it by a mist, by an aerosol, similar to the way some drugs are used, for example, in asthma or so forth, where you breathe it in through a breathing treatment. Because we hypothesized that it would give the strong immune stimulation right to the lungs, where a lot of cancers spread to, but have less side effects on the rest of the body. And we've seen some what we think are exciting results that way. And we think there is potential to do that in many types of cancer, which affect the lungs. And this is an example of a study that would never be done in humans because it's it's not sexy, for lack of a better word. It's repurposing a drug that's been around and sort of applying it in a new way, in a very focused approach, which we think has value, and I think we've demonstrated value to it. But it's not a new molecule that we've engineered in the lab. And I think that's a perfect example of how comparative oncology really can add value. Because this study was done, we were able to do it successfully and shown some promising results, which we would like to continue further. And we're hoping to do that and find stakeholders to support it as a human clinical trial.
It seems like it's almost easier to get these canine clinical trials going than the human clinical trials.
I think it is, in my opinion. The human clinical trials take a lot of time. They're very expensive. There's a tremendous amount of oversight, which is appropriate, but it takes a long time. And accrual can be hard, even when you do get a trial supported and opened and going. And then often the results, because it takes so long, are often sometimes obsolete by the time the clinical trial has been completed. So I think in many ways there are fewer barriers to doing clinical trials in dogs. And another thing that I think is very important is just the altruism in the owners of the dogs, because they want to see trials done. They want their dog to participate because it's a loved one, and they feel like other dogs are other loved ones for other families. And so if their dog can help other dogs, they are really 100% behind that. And so I think all of those things contribute to making clinical trials easier in some ways to do in dogs. And I just wish there was more support globally for canine clinical trials. I mean, we're seeing that. We're seeing a groundswell of interest and of support, which is great. But I think certainly more could be done. And there still are some skeptics out there.
What's really nice is, I think you alluded to or already said, in the beginning that the National Cancer Institute and is really recognizing comparative oncology, and we're just approaching, I believe it's about 20 years for the Comparative Oncology Trials Consortium that's set up through the NCI, which we're a part of. And then, our cancer center, we've been a program for over 10 years now as one of the main programs for the NCI Designated Comprehensive Cancer Center at UC Davis. So I'd say that it is getting recognized more. The funding is still hard to come by. Even though our clinical trials cost less to run than a human clinical trial, they still take resources like Bob was, talking about. And so really, if we want to make these breakthroughs, we do need the support. We do need to be able to have the resources to run these trials because they're not free, and it does take money to run them, but it's vital to it. And, I think, Bob was saying it's a little bit easier. We still do have oversight. We have clinical trials review boards that independently make sure that we're not going to be hurting these patients, that everything's done with informed consent for the owners, since they're enrolling their dog, their cat, in the trial. Which I think is really important to keep in mind as well.
Well, two things that you both have brought up, and so I want to hit on both of them. I'm going to combine it into one big question. Is the program, the Comparative Oncology program, is it still, despite it being for us at UC Davis, kind of a longer running program, and despite the NCI beginning to put more focus on this, do you find it that it's still kind of a niche program amongst other cancer centers or, throughout the United States? Is it something that is that other cancer centers are doing, or are we kind of unique or just one of a few?
So I'll take a crack at that. So I would say that, veterinary oncology is a much smaller field than human oncology. And so there's, 500 plus medical oncologists, 125 radiation oncologists, and on the veterinary side, as opposed to, I don't even know how many are on the human side, thousands. And so we're a bit smaller, and we're the only place where we are a designated program at an NCI designated comprehensive cancer center. There are many good oncology programs at veterinary schools, and many of them have relationships with their medical schools or adjacent medical schools where they work together on individual projects. And there's actually, a fairly good network of places that are building comparative oncology programs. I'd say ours is, we've taken it to a different level, to a high level, by really making it a focus and understanding the importance of coming up with these trials that we've been talking about, but also understanding where the model works and where the model doesn't work. And that's, if you want to call it a model. So, but really, what is the difference between a dog cancer and a human cancer, and kind of what Bob was talking about with the osteosarcoma? Where are there differences and where are there similarities? And I think where our comparative oncology works best when we ask a really specific question at a time. And whether that's if this particular drug can do this particular thing, we are never going to be able to enroll as many patients as a large human clinical trial. That's probably not going to be happening in my career lifetime. Again, we don't have the same kind of resources, and we don't have as many clinician scientists. Something that we're also trying to build, and that's important too. I think is the training aspects of the program that we have, because it's really comprehensive. Not to overuse that word, but it's everything from the training to the research to the clinical work that I think makes us unique.
And I think folks would be interested to know that when we do get these dogs in the clinical trials, we're paying for all of their treatment once they're in the trial.
It depends on the trial. Things that are standard of care, they may be paying for some of that. If you want good information and you want to have good outcomes and you want to learn, you need to do those things. You need to be able to follow the tumors. You need to be able to make sure that there's no toxicity. And it's also our obligation and responsibility for that as well, for our patients, to make sure we're not making them sick. And so I would say that it's actually money well spent. And really, if we're going to learn something, we actually have to spend that money as well.
Dr. Canter, tell us what's going on at the Cancer Center in terms of how we are trying to build a genomic atlas that we think will be helpful with our research into comparative oncology.
So we have started an initiative to perform sequencing of a cohort of dog cancers encompassing some of the most common cancers in dogs, including osteosarcoma, melanoma, and brain tumors. And those are very similar in many ways to human cancers, although the melanoma is a little bit different because it mostly occurs in the oral cavity. And we're sequencing those cancers to get a comprehensive profile of the genes which are being expressed in the tumor, and to use that as a way to really drill down on the diversity, the biology, the behavior, the factors which govern outcome in all of these dogs. And in many ways, it's sort of a extension of what has been done in humans, which is called the Cancer Genome Atlas, which has been a tremendous resource to researchers across the globe, really. And UC Davis, our cancer center, contributed, especially to the sarcoma part of the Human Cancer Genome Atlas. And now that data is publicly available through different portals to allow researchers to query it and look at different genes of interest and how or gene families and how those genes are potentially significant in different cancers or many cancers. So we're in the process of doing something very similar in dogs. Number one, to provide it as a resource for the scientific community at large, but also really to further on a much more, on a much more rigorous way, these exact questions we've been talking about in terms of how similar are dog cancers to human, how different, what are the conditions that make them similar, that make them different, that govern outcome, and potential targets for identifying new therapies.
It's really an exciting new development and sets us apart from certainly a lot of other cancer research underway, but it's all leading to the same goal, which is to cure cancer. And I think it's very interesting that dog data is going to do that for us.
Absolutely. I think it's a very exciting initiative. We just got to get it done.
And Dr. Kent, will this also help us to understand why some cancers affect more breeds than others? For instance, I was reading that Scottish Terriers have like a 22-fold increase of bladder cancer. And some people love this breed, and other breeds like golden retrievers, which has me actually, after losing 2 Goldens, thinking, I don't know if I want to go get another golden retriever puppy and go through that again,
They're amazing dogs, and there are certain breed characteristics or breed predispositions for certain types of tumors, and probably, when humans artificially created all the different breeds, we probably bred in some susceptibility to cancers too. And there's a study that we did was looking at golden retrievers, particularly since you brought that up. And, we looked at all the postmortem exams on all the golden retrievers we saw, more than 500 of them. And, it was 68% of dogs were dying of cancer. And that's, higher than you would expect in the dog population in general, though, as Bob already said, there's not as good data out there, and higher than humans, and there's different breeds or have different susceptibilities, and having this data, like you were alluding to, can help us try to figure out, but also that means some of the noise that's in the background that you get just from having variation, let's say in a person that develops cancer. By honing down on some of these tumors that develop in certain breeds, you may be able to find the driving risk factors and the genetic risk factors for them. And so doing that genetic work, I think, is really important, both on the tumors themselves, but then also in the same normal tissue from that dog to see what are the differences and what's actually kind of baseline.
Well, and to go back to just really quickly, the clinical trial topic, just like Steph, I've had a couple of dogs that I've lost to cancer as well. So for people that have companion animals and they're hearing this, how does our loved pet have the ability to get onto a clinical trial? How does that come about?
We just give out Dr. Kent's cell phone number.
And Bob's willing to take all those calls and collate them for me, he said. But I actually, no, we actually are very reachable. We take referrals through the local veterinarians who are going to help diagnose these. And then also we're able to, through our website, we actually use the same clinical trials backbone that the human medical school uses. I'd say, we have a great clinical trials team here at the vet school, just like they do at the medical school. And our clinical trials nurses are so dedicated to our patients and make sure they get the best care and to make sure that we move forward. And so we have a veterinary center for clinical trials. We also have, a clinical trials receiving line through our oncology services that make sure that the patients can get enrolled and that they're treated. And then, through study pages, which is a way that you can look up the different trials that we have. And so I'll shamelessly put out, you can just Google study pages, UC Davis Veterinary Trials, you'll find it, or it's studypages.com/UC Davis vet/home. That will take you to the trials page, and you can look up and see not only our cancer trials, but all the other trials that we're running through the veterinary school, to try to benefit patients. And some of these are clinical trials in the traditional sense that they're therapy trials, and some are, as we try to learn things, as we try to better understand, let's say, the dog's immune landscape. We've had some trials where we're been looking at how do you actually figure out how to monitor immune responses, in dogs, because all the reagents that we have available on the human side aren't always available. So part of that has been trying to really build the toolbox too, so that we can really conduct very robust trials.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else that we haven't covered that maybe you'd like to highlight or bring to our attention?
No, I mean, I think understanding that this is many people, so this isn't just, Bob and myself doing this. We have multiple people over at the Human Cancer Center and multiple people here at Davis at the veterinary school who are working on this problem. And it's going to take many people working on it to really reach that end goal that, like you said, Stephanie, ending cancer. And that's the goal. And so we need to work together and take what we can learn in my patients, what Bob can learn in his patients to help everyone.
I think, yeah, I would actually, I think, add that I think there's clearly tremendous potential in comparative oncology. I think there is still a lot of work to be done to really, take that to the next level, to really unlock that potential, because I would like to see the same level of clinical trials, infrastructure, options, immune monitoring, translational science that really can capitalize on the amount we can learn, especially from dogs, which is my interest of dogs with cancer, because there really are these known limitations in the current system. The current system is tremendously valuable. I mean, some very revolutionary breakthroughs have occurred, leading to Nobel Prize, leading to breakthroughs in how patients are treated. But there's still a lot of work to be done, and the current pipeline has a lot of failure from mouse to human. And I really think if we can truly realize the potential of comparative oncology, we can make that a lot better. And so that would really be my goal for the future.
Well, thanks to both of you for being pioneers in this field. You make us very proud.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you for tuning in and listening today. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us directly at beatcancer@ucdavis.edu. Beat Cancer is a production of the UC Davis Comprehensive Cancer Center. For more information on our NCI-designated Comprehensive Cancer Center, please visit health.ucdavis.edu/cancer.